In this video, I'm going to show you the one thing that successful yogis do when a low mood hits during their practice that completely transforms their mental state. I used to think that when a low mood kind of crept into my practice, especially in those forward folds, in the sitting sequence, I just had to push through it, I just had to push it down and continue. But in fact, it was making it much worse. I was creating this kind of negative association between my practice and how I felt, and I didn't even realize it for a long time. But if you're new here, I'm Sushmita, but you can call me Sushi. And on this channel, I help you quiet your racing thoughts and reclaim your inner focus using the tried and tested Ashtanga Vinyasa system. If you want to learn how to do yoga in this authentic method, I created the Yoga Mastery program where you learn about how to apply these techniques to specific poses. There's a link for that in the description below. But today we're actually going to go over why this is actually happening to you, why you feel this low mood, and whenever you feel stuck on some emotion or you feel like frozen in a particular pose, what to do and how to release that stored emotional energy. So let's dive right in. So think about the last time you were on your mat and this happened. Maybe you're in the middle of your, standing sequence or sitting sequence and you're in this deep forward fold, let's say, and you've obviously come to the mat to find release, to feel better, and to kind of carry on with your day with a sense of lightness, right? But then completely out of the blue, nothing has triggered you in the morning and you notice that a wave of bad mood hits. And it could be a little bit of sadness, just like frustration or irritability. And you just feel like, man, I don't really want to practice anymore. And you get up, roll up your mat, and you leave. But it makes no sense to you because nothing really triggered you. And this was supposed to be your time to feel good, to connect with yourself, and kind of heal from the inside out, right? And at first, you tried to fight it. Surely, you tried to push it down, and you tried to just force yourself to finish the practice so that you feel a certain way and you feel good about yourself. And it almost always, when you tried to do this, feels like one more thing that you're failing at, and you end up feeling like, I don't really want to do this practice, and it creates this negative association that I was talking about. And this is the exact moment where most of us, even with the best of intentions, create this negative cycle, and it teaches our bodies that these poses that we do on the mat end up creating an internal struggle. And because we want to avoid the internal struggle, we also end up avoiding the poses and the practice altogether. So what if we can do this a different way? Most long-term practitioners, like friends and colleagues of mine that are here in Mysore, have only managed to sustain a deep, long-term, nourishing practice because they know that the key is to not resist that mood that comes up, but to rather gently guide it. And today we're going to go over some of the practical tools, these gentle, repetitive movements that you can do to beat a low mood on the mat. And I promise you it's going to transform the way that you show up on the mat and show up for yourself in your entire relationship to yoga. But before I explain how to actually do this and implement this on the mat, I think it's really, really important for us to pull back the curtain and see why this happens in the first place. Why does a practice that's designed for wellness sometimes somehow trigger this low, bad mood? Understanding this is the first step to, of course, changing it. And if you actually think about it, you're not doing anything wrong. If you're experiencing sadness or frustration or irritability, the problem isn't the feeling that's coming up itself. It's your reaction to it. And the story that we tell ourselves kind of informs the way that we feel about the practice, and sometimes we can get stuck in this bad mood even after we leave the mat. And research has shown that our physical posture, the way we sit, the way we walk, the way we move, can directly affect our emotional state. Think about it in the simplest terms. When you feel sad, your shoulders are hunched, your chin juts forward, your chest collapses, and I can't even speak so well from this posture. But when you feel joyful and confident, your posture becomes naturally more upright, you feel a sense of brightness and openness. And this is no coincidence, right? Adopting a slump posture can actually create this corresponding feeling. But when you open and sit upright, it also sends this signal to your brain that you're safe, that you're open. But when we exist in those states of stress, when our body is in a forward fold, just like when you're reaching for your toes and your shoulders are kind of slumped over, your chest is collapsed so your breath is not full. This then sends a signal to your brain that it's in a state of stress. So why is it that some poses, like these forward folds or deep, like, hip openers, for example, make us feel kind of bad, because most of us, I'm sure you've been there, you've been in a class and you've been in pigeon pose or Baddha Konasana or whatever, and instead of this glorious release that everyone talks about, you just feel like irritation, sadness, and this feeling of being stuck, like you can't move further into the pose. And this is often tied to a natural but like completely deeply ingrained intelligent nervous system response called the freeze response. Now, I'm sure you've heard of fight or flight, everyone talks about it. But the freeze, this third response, is equally important, and we don't quite give it enough airtime as a survival strategy. It's this response of feeling overwhelmed, where the body and the mind both feel stuck and like numb and almost like immobilized, like it can't get out of that state. And because we're so used to either fighting and getting aggressive or just like removing ourselves from the situation, like rolling up our mat and leaving, this freeze response, this middle ground that happens when you're on your yoga mat, when you're in a class and you can't just get up and leave halfway, it can come up because it's a response to chronic stress. And if you don't deal with chronic stress in an intelligent way by releasing it in a structured method, your emotional burnout, the way that you feel, manifests in the poses. And we experience this as what is known as the functional freeze. So you're still moving through your day, but inside there's a little bit of this muted, disconnected, feeling, and it feels like you're walking through molasses. I know I've been there for weeks, so I know exactly what to do as well to come out of it. And when you get into a yoga pose that kind of brings up those feelings in you, it might look like you're holding the pose on the outside with extreme stiffness. Even if your teacher tells you relax and breathe, you just don't feel safe to relax and breathe. And your breath might get shallow as a response, and you end up like, holding your breath sometimes just to get through the shape. And your mind will start going into like all this negative self-talk that it usually goes into about how you're so bad at yoga or like how you shouldn't be doing this. And this is classic of your nervous system being in freeze state. So just that is the crucial part, right? To acknowledge that whenever you come into this state where it's a frustrating practice, it's not just that that thing is fixed, but a common response is that when you come into this freeze state, you meet it with force. You try and push through it because it's not fight or flight, right? You try and use fight to overcome it, or you just end up rolling up your mat. And if we look at just this freeze response, what happens to us when we try and push through it? We kind of end up getting angry at our own bodies. It's not cooperating. It's not listening to you. And then by the end of the practice, this freeze response just deepens and it builds a negative association with your entire practice and sometimes even your body. So because of this downward spiral that's been created, you come to the mat to feel better, but the pose triggers a freeze response. You then end up resisting it, and then you feel much worse than when you started, and you leave the mat feeling defeated. So this is the loop that gets created when you come into this freeze response and a low mood hits. And it's kind of like a self-perpetuating loop. And the solution to kind of getting out of this is, instead of fighting, we want to allow this freeze response to thaw, almost like you're placing a block of ice on a countertop and letting it slowly melt so that you can, clean up the countertop or drink it as water. By guiding our bodies into gentle motion, instead of staying stuck and frozen and rigid, we are then compassionately acknowledging whatever is happening, but we're also shifting our bodies from this place of resistance to guidance. And that is the crucial thing that transforms your practice. And then you create the conditions in your body where it feels safe enough for that natural shift to occur. And we're just going to learn how in 3 simple steps. But I just want to say, like when I see, videos on YouTube that say 3 poses to fix shoulder tension, for example, it leaves you twisted into a pretzel, or like you do all these complicated stretches. But it's not necessary when you understand these principles, and you can apply it to any kind of practice, because it's a much more like gentler, powerful, and kind of subtler practice. But it's obviously one that you can apply anytime, anywhere. So this tiny compassionate change about how you respond to that moment actually is the solution to shifting into a place of awareness and openness. So what are these 3 tips that I'm going to give you? The first one is bringing awareness to the body. The second one is to invite micro movements in the body. And the third one is just to move in opposite directions. So we're going to do poses and counter poses. So first one is awareness. Now this is honestly the foundation. It's the most important part because whenever we're in a low mood, that feeling of being stuck comes up. The first job is to just notice it. That's your job. Not judge it, not try and remove it, but just name what's present and acknowledge it. Without adding some story of negative association to it, whenever you're in 𝐸𝐸 B and you notice you can't get your chin to the floor, it's to say, there it is. I'm in 𝐸𝐸 B and sadness has arrived. I notice myself tightening, I notice myself tensing, and I can't get my chin to the floor. I know I feel stuck. And even though I can't go anymore, I recognize that I'm not failing just because I'm not going deeper. This is just the emotion that it's bringing up. And so you have to talk to yourself like this inside your head while you're practicing. And that's it. This is the simple act of noticing what's present and not adding this story of failure to it. And I promise you, this is incredibly powerful because it separates you from the emotion. You are not the sadness. You are the one noticing the sadness. And that's your first signal to your nervous system that you aren't in any immediate danger, you're safe enough to simply observe, and it can go away slowly. But it doesn't go away if you just stay stuck. You've got to add in the second part, which is the micro movements. Now, this is where you gently allow that block of ice to thaw and melt. And instead of holding the pose, tightening your breath, and like rigidly just, being like, I need to hold strength in this pose, what you want to do is introduce gentle, tiny movements that are almost invisible to the rest of the class. But these invisible micro movements kind of serve as a direct antidote to the immobility that comes with this freeze response. And so I'm talking about really, really subtle things. Let's say you're in Baddha Konasana or butterfly pose and you feel that usual heavy, stuck sensation in your hips. Instead of staying frozen but trying to get your head closer, start to move your pelvis slowly backwards and forwards. Maybe raise your legs gently and lower them down. It's to create space and to move super, super small movements. I'm talking about like millimeters, not even inches. Really, really tiny movements. And these small repetitive actions, do this like over some time, your nervous system feels deeply soothed. It's like rocking a baby. You're really doing slow, soft movements, but you're getting your nervous system into a state of rest and digest. And so what we're trying to do here is communicate safety and fluidity. And you're saying to yourself, it's okay, we're not trapped here, we don't have to hold this position rigidly, we can move, there's nothing that's holding us back. And this gentle motion then melts the tension from the inside out. And that is the second technique. So first one is awareness, and the second one is gentle, slow movements. Coming to the third one, it is opposite movements of posture and counter posture. So once we've done these micro movements in an individual posture, we can then expand this into a flowing transition between two opposite shapes. So let's say you're in Paschimottanasana where you're folded forwards. Then the next pose that you do is Purvottanasana where you're in an open back bend. Now this is a fantastic way to release stored energy because you're moving it in different planes and because it prevents the body from getting stuck in any one position for too long. And the cool thing about the Ashtanga practice is that it has built in this pose, counter pose kind of method. And if you just learn the correct technique and you learn how to do it under the guidance of a qualified teacher, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, there's a link in the description below, you'll see how you can go into these opposite movements and still somehow feel that stretch but strength at the same time. And this method helps us to process and move through any stagnant energy because you're also doing vinyasas in between. And it's just instead of holding a single pose for really long, like in yin yoga when stuff comes up and you're just stuck there for 2 minutes, you're only expected to hold something for 5 breaths. So 5 breaths feels like manageable. It's not too long, but with the intention of holding pose and then shifting to counter pose and feeling that, that opposite movement. So that's it. These are your 3 main techniques, but underpinning all these 3 things is the breath. Your breath is obviously your ultimate anchor, and in the Ashtanga practice, they recommend that we do free breathing with sound. So, this way, you're allowing your breath to pass through the back of your throat all the way to your navel, and this actually gently stimulates your vagus nerve. I'm sure you've heard of the vagus nerve, but it's a nerve that runs all the way from the gut to the brain, and it activates the parasympathetic nervous system. This is your body's rest and digest mode. But in your practice, it's really important to avoid holding your breath or clenching your body in that way, because then it can sometimes reinforce this freeze response. So by making the breath gentle and fluid and continuous, you're not reinforcing, or you're kind of dislodging that freeze response in your body. So that's it. You can't just do 3 poses to feel better when you feel like, low. You have to develop this beautiful, compassionate lens to yourself and to your practice by noticing the feeling without judgment, responding with these kinds of micro movements, exploring between opposite shapes, and finally anchoring it all with this steady, deep 𝐸𝐸𝐸 breath. And this is how you shift from being a victim of your low mood to actually becoming kind of like a gentle guide to this low mood. So you can shift out of this stage. So the next time you feel stuck on your mat, I want you to truly meet it. Don't fight it. Don't run away from it. Don't distract yourself with your phone. And don't just check out in a pose and think about something else. Really meet it with awareness, meet it with breath, meet it with gentle, compassionate movement. And for me, this feels like a radical act of self-care. When you notice a bad mood and it's inevitably going to come up, but you meet it with kindness instead of resistance. And that is really something that you learn on the mat, but can be translated into the rest of your life. And Ashtanga is one of those practices that you can always return to. It's a self-practice, and you have the tools now to gently guide yourself out of that stuckness and into a state of feeling alive again, to feel that free flow of energy that comes from the vinyasa method. And each day, honestly, it looks different. I've been practicing for a long time. I can tell you this for sure, that it kind of feels like you're dipping your toe in this stream of flowing experiences. So if life had a load of experiences and you're just dipping your toe in this water, one day it's cold as hell and you can't get in, and another day it's super warm because the sun is out and it doesn't feel like a cooling thing for your body. And either of those two extremes, it's just the changing nature of the water depending on the weather. And if we have this intention that the practice is meant to have this cleansing effect, whether it's a cold day or a hot day, we'll still get into the water because we need to clean these impurities. We need to get rid of these vrittis in our mind and allow the water to flow through and release all of the stuckness within us. And this way, you're kind of going with the flow in a sense, right? So that's all I have for you today. By the way, if you're struggling to kind of quiet these looping thoughts on your mat and you feel like you've been practicing for a long time, but you haven't even scratched the surface of this type of changing your mental, emotional state through the practice, then feel free to book a call with me using the link in the description below. It is absolutely free and you don't have to do it, but we're going to just have a chat and see if you might be a good fit for the program, if I can truly really help you. And thank you so much once again for watching till the very end. If this resonated with you, I would be so grateful if you could subscribe to my YouTube channel or send this to a friend or a family member who's been stuck in freeze mode even during the day and wants to break free from this cycle. As always, I hope you have a wonderful day ahead. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.